Welcome to Falcons Drip, your go-to source for Falcons news and draft coverage. I'm Thon, founder and voice of Falcons Drip. Welcome back, everybody. Today, we got a special bonus episode for you guys. I won't be joined by my co-host, Kyle. Instead, I was asked to join Daniel and Matt from ScoutD. That's ScoutD if you're looking for them on Instagram and Twitter. So they brought me on to their show. We're going to take some clips from that, and I'll post that for you guys later on Instagram. But they were just asking me some questions about the Falcons in the draft. So they sent me the recording, and I will be showing you guys here. So I hope you enjoy it. Special thanks to ScoutD, and hopefully things go well for them, and you guys enjoy the recording. All right, without any more time wasted, let's jump into it.
So, Falcons Drip, I got an early question for you. You know, the Falcons have been extremely busy this offseason. They brought in big names, Jesse Bates, Johnny Smith for that offense. They traded for Okudah, Calais Campbell, and many more. I personally just feel if they stayed at 8 and, you know, wrote it out with Desmond Ridder, it wouldn't be as big a success as an offseason as it should be. You know, they've shown they're willing to swing for the fences, and that's why we have them trading up to 3, giving up the assets, and getting their quarterback of the future in CJ Stroud. Do you think that's something that's realistic and they could go out and get Stroud? I saw he visited with them today. Or do you think they're going to, you know, ride it out with Ridder and see what they have in him and give him, you know, a bigger opportunity?
You know, at this point, I think they're just going to ride it out. Heineke came out and said in this press conference, he came in knowing Ridder was the guy. You know, they've come out and talked about possibly taking quarterback if it was a miracle and somebody fell to them. And I just think they believe in Ridder and what he can do, and they're going to give him a year. They're going to give him a year to prove that. You know, I actually think that they're more likely to trade back, trading back, acquiring assets, and possibly like getting an extra first round pick for next year's draft class. And if they're able to do that, and then Ridder isn't the guy, maybe in 2024 they can make a play and another push for a quarterback with those 2 first rounders.
Yeah, I think there's also something to be said about next year's class for sure, because, you know, in this case, if Desmond Ridder doesn't pan out, you're likely to have one of those top picks in the next year's draft, and that positions you to go out and get a quarterback in the obviously dream class there with Caleb Williams. And I don't mind that at all, but here's my thing with it. I read something interesting a couple of months back talking about how the older owners in the league were going to be aggressive and try to start winning now and contending now. And like Matt said, you know, this is a big offseason for them. They've made a ton of additions here. And, you know, I'm not sold on Ridder personally. And I don't think it would be wise to go and select a guy like Anthony Richardson or Will Levis there. But I do think if you have the opportunity to make a trade for CJ Stroud there, I do think that that's an unequivocal upgrade, regardless of what one thinks Ridder could be.
Yeah, and I don't disagree that it would be an upgrade. I'm actually not as high on Stroud as I know a lot of other people are. Don't get me wrong, he's great. He's the second best quarterback in this class. I just get a little worried with his consistency under pressure. And sometimes I feel like he stares receivers down. Don't get me wrong. Like I said, he's amazing. But like, I think Bryce Young to me is just next level, and maybe he would be worth trading up for. I don't know if CJ Stroud is on that same stratosphere. Like when I look at, you know, my overall quarterback ratings, you know, if you look at the last five years, you know, you have Trevor Lawrence obviously as the top guy coming out, right? You know, we all know Joe Burrow is a stud, but to me, Bryce Young is on that same tier with Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert. They were kind of like my top guys coming out in the last 5 years. So,
yeah, no, we're also very, very high on Bryce Young. That's our number one quarterback, obviously, and we as well. We think he's a generational guy who can step in right away. So obviously, we probably don't think they're going to have the chance to trade up for him, assuming he goes 1 to the Panthers. But, you know, it's definitely going to be a conversation on draft day if Stroud potentially falls past 2. Is there a point where, like, is there a certain pick where he falls to where you are then moving to the camp where you're like, I want to make this move to go up and get him at like 5, 6 if he gets to that point?
Yeah, I think if he falls, it's not so much where he falls. I guess it's the compensation. You know, I saw a mock draft yesterday, a couple days ago, where Atlanta gave up a 3rd-round pick to go up to 5 and take Will Anderson. I just, if you're going to tell me you're going to give up a 3 to go get a Will Anderson and CJ Stroud, somebody like that, like that's an absolute no-brainer. I don't know. I think like I said, I think I would rather trade back and try and acquire assets and hopefully next year move up to grab somebody like that. I understand too, like they talking about Blank being an older owner and wanting to win, but it feels like he's kind of handed the keys over to Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenot, and he's willing to kind of sit back and see how it plays out.
Yeah, fair enough. And, like we said before, if it does work out with Ridder, that's great. If it doesn't, then you're probably positioned to take one of these guys next year. So assuming that they do stick at 8, they don't trade back, they don't trade up. Who are some targets you like? One guy that pops off the page for me is Nolan Smith. Seeing the power guys that they've kind of brought in this offseason and that they already had on their roster. Jarrett, Calais Campbell, Onyemata, Dupree, Ebiketie, obviously. These are powerful, big guys. And I think a guy like Nolan Smith, who is a bit of a different skill set, a bit more finesse, quicker athleticism, I think having a guy like that would pair very nicely with those complementary pieces.
Nolan Smith is actually like my go-to guy. Like that's who I would like to see Atlanta end up with. I actually think his upside is higher than Will Anderson's. I know Will Anderson's floor is ridiculous. I think Will Anderson's floor is like at least a 10-sack guy. But the speed, the power, the strength, really, it feels like Nolan Smith has it all, and he just hasn't put it all together yet. Whether that be lack of refinement, whether that be kind of, I know they've talked about at Georgia, he was asked to defend the run first, and he's a team guy, so he'll do whatever you ask first, and he won't ask questions.
I love that because I'm for sure in agreement there. I think my number one target that I'd love to see the Falcons go after at staying at 8 is definitely Nolan Smith as well. And we obviously saw it at the combine. We didn't get to see him too much in the last season because of that injury, but coming from Georgia, I think that's a perfect fit with the guys that they already have here. And I think personally that's a home run pick.
Yeah. And I don't know have you guys seen like the chart or the statistics of his like pressure rate and those kinds of things?
Yeah, it's off the charts.
Yeah. So his, I know he doesn't have a lot of sack production, but his pressure rate is at 16.3. So Will Anderson is at 16.9. Some of the guys in the past, Trayvon Walker had an 8.8. Aiden Hutchinson had a 13.3. Thibodeau had a 14.2. Chase Young was at a 16.9. So just like right there.
For sure. And, it's hard to make this comparison, obviously, because this is arguably the best defensive player in the league. But a guy like Micah Parsons, I kind of compare the play style where they can do so many different things. They can rush the passer. They can defend against the run. They can drop back into coverage. They can chase down the screen passes, the RPOs. These are types of guys that can really do it all. And I think in today's day and age where the game is heading with those unique schemes, you need guys like this on the field. So I'm absolutely all for Nolan Smith at 8.
Yeah. So like one last thing before we move on, just because I can't get enough of Nolan Smith, but and I've been pounding the table. I'm actually not a Georgia fan. So a lot of people, because I pound the table so hard for Nolan Smith, people think I'm a Georgia fan, but I'm not like a homer. I love good football, and that's his brand. But if you look at the defensive players the Falcons have brought in this offseason, most of them have these qualities, right? Or they all have these qualities. They're good against the run. They have great mental makeup. They're considered high character players. Most of them have ties to Georgia. They're great athletes and they're versatile. And tell me that's not Nolan Smith.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. I think if they do end up staying at 8, I think Nolan Smith is one of the more likely selections and definitely a guy that I think would be the correct pick there. So let me ask you something quickly, because they obviously added Okudah, which I personally love. I think it's a low risk, high reward move. They obviously didn't give up too much. And if he has a good season, a bounce back season, that's a really high upside move. So do you think that kind of takes away from possibly drafting a corner at 8? Because obviously Hayward's getting older. I think he's 33, and Terrell, he's obviously great, but coming off some injuries and a dip in production. So do you think that there's a good chance that they could still target corner at pick 8?
So a couple of things. So think about Okudah. Like one thing that people don't recognize too. So worst case scenario, he fails out, right? And we just lose a 5th round pick. Best case scenario, he's amazing. We are able to re-sign him. We've got him and AJ Terrell awesome. Another scenario is he's amazing and we can't re-sign him because we just can't afford him, or we don't want to put that kind of resources into one position.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the case, he goes, signs a big contract somewhere else. We're likely to get a comp pick back, probably if he plays that well, a 3. So we've just taken a 5-rounder, moved it to a 3rd. So that being said, no, I don't think it stops you, because you need 3 good cornerbacks anyways. And you kind of hit the nail on the head. We've got guys with expiring contracts. So I would love, if they took Christian Gonzales, I'd also be very happy with that.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it with that. Okudah, they only have him for 1 year. If he's bad, he doesn't pan out, they could still draft a corner. And even if he's really good, as you said, he couldn't go out and sign with another team. So I don't think you can go wrong here adding one of these 2 corners in Christian Gonzales and Devin Witherspoon at 8, as they both have really good potential and could be, really good corners for the Falcons down the road.
Similarly to when we talked about the edge rushers, but we talk about upside and floor. Like Devin Witherspoon feels like his floor is he's a great slot cornerback, right? Mm-hmm. But his upside is still really high. But Christian Gonzales feels like his floor is, maybe a rotational guy, special teams guy, with his ceiling just feels like it's, top 5 cornerback. Like there's something like I always say like his hip, he's got hips like Shakira. Like they just don't lie. Like they're just like unbelievable. His man turns, his zone turns, his ability to just get in and out of his breaks. He's just like a next level athlete.
That's a great analogy. Definitely a very fluid player there. So the thing I look about here is, if you add another cornerback, I think that instantly makes your secondary a big, big strength. Adding Jesse Bates, adding Okudah, already having AJ Terrell, and then, getting one of those young guys in Gonzales and Witherspoon. I think that selection definitely makes this a fearsome secondary. So those are definitely both routes I could see the Falcons taking, and quality options at that. I think these are my unrealistic dream scenarios that I had jotted down if one of these players were to fall, which I don't think is the case, but that's Tyree Wilson and Jalen Carter. So what are your thoughts on if those players were to be there at 8?
So if we went in that direction, and just thinking out loud, like it feels like Tyree Wilson is more of the edge that everybody's kind of mocking to Atlanta. That's like the player that Nielsen, their new defensive coordinator, likes, with the Cam Jordan, Marcus Davenport. Mm-hmm. They're just the bigger, tougher, move the pocket defensive ends. I like Nolan Smith more than I like Tyree Wilson, truthfully. But if we went that route, if we went with Tyree Wilson, like I trust this front office, I trust this coaching staff. They've made all the right moves thus far. So I'm not going to say, oh, you should have taken Nolan Smith. There's a reason why they took him. And if they took Tyree Wilson, they probably think he's going to be better fit. But you can't go wrong. Like it's apples and oranges. They're both 2 great players.
Absolutely. And I think going back to that point quickly that I initially made, I think there are a lot of more powerful run defenders on that roster already. So to get a guy like Nolan Smith, I do think makes a bit more sense here to throw him in the mix and have a complementary piece that kind of contrasts the playing style that already exists on that D-line.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier also that you kind of envisioned them trading down and you would like to pick up some future draft capital for next year's draft class. Who are some targets you had in mind if they were to trade down maybe into the 20s range?
Oh, into the 20s range. Well, so I've never even thought about them going that far. But like, truthfully, there's so many players there. There's a lot of good cornerbacks in this draft class, whether it be, Joey Porter, Deontay Banks. If either one of those guys were to fall, I don't know if they will. There's a lot of good offensive linemen. If any of those guys were to kind of fall down, there's really like 5 or 6 good tackles in this draft. Although Atlanta doesn't need to tackle, if they could get a guy to play guard and then who could bump out to tackle. And, these are guys probably going more in the single digits to teens, but like a Peter Skronsky, Paris Johnson, a Broderick Jones, like if those guys could bump over and play guard. And then when you lose either McGarry's only got 3 years on his deal, or you lose Jake Matthews, whether it be because he gets older or you're ready to get out from under his contract, then whoever you draft there could possibly bump over from guard to tackle.
So you mentioned the versatility to guard and tackle. Would you be okay with them drafting a guy like Skoronsky sitting there at 8?
So would I be okay with it? Yes, I would be okay with it. It's not like my ideal situation, because I think I would rather take a guy like Broderick or Paris Johnson, right? Because I feel like those are two guys who have higher. I'm a big potential guy, if you guys haven't noticed, but I feel like those guys have higher potentials as a tackle. But I'm not going to be mad with Skaronski. Like, we have this awesome run game, and we're kind of lacking a left guard right now. So again, it comes down to, I trust this front office at this point.
For sure, yeah. And, that's a good point, which I'll bring up once we get to the day 2 and 3 targets. But just to quickly wrap up the options at 8, there's obviously a lot of chatter about Bijan Robinson at 8, and he's kind of, I think, the betting favorite there right now. So personally, this is my take. Obviously, the running back position has been devalued a ton, and I'm okay with drafting a running back early if you're ready to contend now. So for a team like the Eagles sitting at 10, I don't mind it. But I think otherwise, you're kind of wasting the prime years of a running back, the optimal age where they're performing at their best. So I just don't see this as a pick that makes sense. And I also think like Tyler Algier was very good last year. So I'm not buying the hype on Bijan at 8. I don't necessarily think it's a great fit, and I don't think it would be a good use of assets. And, that's nothing against Bijan Robinson, because I do think he's the perfect running back.
So I go back and forth on this all the time. Like, I don't have a clear answer for you, but just to kind of play devil's advocate, I'll tell you why I think it could be a good idea. If you kind of look at it, I mean, I don't think there's a team that ran the ball more than the Falcons, maybe the Bears last year. And you lose Caleb Huntley. We don't know if he probably won't be ready for the start of the season. Your backup now is Cordell Patterson, who was definitely better off in a, he got worn down as the season went on, and you could kind of see that the grind taking its toll on him. So we do need another running back to kind of match with Tyler Algier, and Bijan Robinson is the best guy in this draft for that. He also, too, as far as like wide receivers go in this class, Bijan Robinson would be a top 3 receiver in this class as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I actually made that point in one of our videos, saying how he'd probably be a first round pick if he converted to receiver.
Have you looked at his RAS scores compared to Deebo Samuel?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
It's like they're like the same player.
Yeah, literally. So yeah, I mean, if you're getting a guy like Bijan Robinson in general, like, you can't go wrong. This is a guy who's going to impact your team in so many ways. I just think for them right now, I don't think that they're ready to contend. Yes, they're in a weak division. They can win games. They could even make a playoff run, but I just don't know if they'd be maximizing this pick at 8, adding a running back.
But I agree.
It's a fun option, of course. And you can never be mad at getting a guy of that talent. So
to agree on all levels. And I think that's why I go back and forth, because at that point, will he be the best player in the draft? Probably. Will he make a huge impact right away? For sure. Will it last long enough to be worth it? I don't know. It's a position of need. No. It's just like it's there's no like middle ground with him. Like, every answer you give, it's either like a strong yes or a strong no.
Yeah, I like that. For sure. So let's move on to day 2 and 3 targets. I guess I could give one, we could discuss, you could give one. I've got a couple written down here. So you talked about the power run game and, the hole at guard. I look at a guy like Steve Avila from TCU, very powerful, big frame. And, he's ready to compete right now. I think this is a guy that can step in day 1 and really fit into that run scheme and improve that run game even more.
Yeah, I love him. And I don't know where he's going to go. This is such a weird class, because it feels like it's every position has its own flavor, I guess, for lack of better words. Like, it depends on what you like. If I've seen him going as low as like the 3rd round, I've seen him going as high as the 1st round. I feel like if he's the best player on your board in the 2nd round, then take him. But to me, I would love him in the 3rd, or trading back in the 2nd, or trading up from the 3rd, from your 3rd round pick to kind of grab him. Like, I've got him kind of as like a mid 2 for me. And I would rather take a guy in the 2nd round who is supposed to be a 1st rounder that kind of falls, if that makes any sense. But he's awesome. Like, I will have no complaints about taking him at 44. Team captain, he played guard and center. He's absolutely massive. He's strong. Once he kind of gets into his blocks, like, there's no getting him off, and he's got a little nasty to him, which I love. He could sometimes he's a little slow on like blitz pickups and those kinds of things. But I feel like all of his downfalls are things that are coachable. And with Dwayne Ledford, our offensive line coach, who's just been making miracles over here, he's just a total ass kicker. So
for sure. And, I think this is a fit where some of those weaknesses, the movement, the mobility, I think this is a team that can kind of hide those weaknesses because they do love to run the ball. So I think this is a great scheme fit. And like you said, obviously great coaches there in the offensive line department.
Yeah, absolutely.
How would you feel about maybe them going the receiver route and taking a shot on a guy like Tyler Scott or maybe even Trey Palmer from Nebraska?
I love both of those guys. Like I love Tyler Scott and I love Trey Palmer. Here's my qualms with it. I think there's so many great round 2 and round 3 receivers that I would hate to force the issue at 44. We just kind of look across the board, and I don't know where like some of these other guys are going to go. Like there's some guys considered to be late ones that I could see getting pushed into the second round. So I'm not going to like count those guys, but maybe even like like Xavier Hutchinson, Tyler Scott, like you mentioned, Rashee Rice, Cedric Tillman, Marvin Mims, Jaden Reed, Trey Palmer, Jonathan Mingo, A.T. Perry. Like there's just so many guys that I'm actually totally fine waiting until round 4, because I think there's so many receivers that can go. Well, there's so many receivers that I feel like one of them are going to be there at pick 110. I don't know which one, but
that's a good point. I think this is one of the deeper receiver classes. Obviously, it's not as top heavy as it was last year or in previous years, but like you said, this is a draft class where you're getting quality guys on day 3. So that's a great point. I definitely don't think that they have to force it. Now, I look at a guy like Drake London, who's your big volume guy, and I think if they are to target receiver here, they should be looking at 2 traits. Either they go for that kind of vertical presence that can add some speed and maintain that kind of identity of size with Pitts and London, obviously, or they go for a smaller guy who can kind of work the whole field and work in the slot and, kind of be another volume guy there. So that's why I personally love Tyler Scott and Trey Palmer as a couple targets. So if they were there in the 3rd, I think those are very good options for the Falcons.
Yeah, I love both of those guys. And I think it kind of comes down to where are these receivers going, right? Like if all of a sudden you're because like I said, I don't think I'd take a receiver at 44. Maybe I would probably take JSN at 44, but there's no way he'll be there. Or like maybe like a Zay Flowers or somebody like that, like a first rounder who kind of falls to 44. But if you're in round 2 and all of a sudden guys start going off the board in round 2, then you're kind of your hands forced in round 3 because you want to grab a guy. Or if you feel like there's a guy who's just like head and shoulders above all these guys, like if you think Cedric Tillman is your guy, or if you think it's Tyler Scott, whoever, then take him at 75. But personally, I think there's so many good players, and you could use either that same, like you said, the big bodied number 2 receiver or the number 3 receiver. Like they could use either one of those, because Matt Collins and Scotty Miller are both on 1-year deals. So you could replace either one of them in the draft class at pick 110.
Definitely. And, so last position I identify as kind of a need. Obviously, they added a ton to their D-line in this offseason. But again, this is an aging group with Calais Campbell possibly playing his final years and Grady Jarrett coming off injury and also getting up there in age. So I think you obviously have to add some youth to that position group on the interior. A guy that I look at here is Gervon Dexter, who personally on tape, I think he showed a ton of flashes of dominance. The consistency isn't necessarily there yet. He needs to, make a foundation and, provide this at a more consistent rate. But I think developing alongside those types of guys who have been there, done that, that would be a great landing spot for them and a guy that can contribute right away and also long term.
Yeah, so I actually recently, probably the last 2 weeks, like rewatched Gervon Dexter, and I was like, I totally flipped my opinion on him. So I was totally down on him, and I thought he was like, I watched some of his stuff, and I'm like, wow, he's so slow off the ball, and I was like, I probably shouldn't have thought this, but I thought, it seems like he's like lazy, and he's like I said, effort concerns. And I went and watched again last week because I like to always double check my work. And I was like, wait a second, he's not lazy. He's just so slow off the ball. And I think, but everything else, he's great. I shouldn't say everything else. So he's slow off the ball. He plays really high, and his technique is like meh. but he's got incredible size and length. His athleticism is there, right? I think he ran a 4.8 at the combine, and there's times where he's just like big boying those guys out there, like just tossing one or two players around. And I think it's he just needs to be coached up, and I think we got to figure out how to get his explosiveness off the line up there, because if he can't get that figured out, if he's going to be slow off the line, like he's like Ben and all the snaps that I watched, then there's no way he can make it in the NFL. But if he can get it figured out and he can work on some of this technique stuff, he could be a dominant force. So he's so volatile to me.
Yeah, for sure. Those are all things that I also saw on tape. So that's kind of why I identify the Falcons as a landing spot here with some of those more accomplished interior players. I would love to see that fit for him to get mentored there. So
what round would you take him in, you think?
Ideally, you could probably get him in the third.
Yeah. So in my old way of looking at him, I kind of saw him as like a mid to late third rounder. So if he was there in the fourth, I wouldn't mind taking him there. But like after rewatching him, I think he's probably. It's just like the potential. It's just so volatile. Like he's probably, a third round pick, but. Yeah, if he played like to his highest ability, like he's a late one.
For sure. Yeah. It's a tough evaluation because there are teams that are going to see the flashes of dominance and say, this is a guy that we're okay taking on day two. So again, like you said, very volatile player who could go anywhere. But I think if he's there on late day two, day three, this is a guy that the Falcons could definitely target. So I'll ask one final question. Last year in my draft prep, one guy that I absolutely loved, I was very interested in, was Troy Anderson, coming from a quarterback and shifting to a linebacker. And I just absolutely loved his tape. Extremely fun to watch. So I didn't get to watch too much of him this year. So I'd like to hear kind of your thoughts on his rookie season and your expectations for him to grow over the coming years.
Yeah. So Troy Anderson looked like a freak athlete who hasn't played linebacker for very long, which is exactly what he is. And it kind of felt like it kind of felt like they threw him into that position and just had him learn by fire. Is that what the saying? Learn by fire.
Yeah.
He showed flashes of absolute brilliance, like just coming from across the field and just lighting people up. He had an awesome block punt in one of last year's games. And then you also saw just complete lapses in coverage, some missed tackles. I'm excited for where he can get to. I think he has the potential, and I think he has the work ethic to become an all-pro linebacker. Like it's there. The size, the athleticism, the work, the drive is all there. Now he just has to put it together. It's easier said than done. So hopefully he's in the weight room. Hopefully he's studying. Hopefully he's working with the coaches, because it's there. But you could say that for a lot of players and it never pans out. So the sky's the limit for Troy Anderson. Let's just see if he can put it together.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way of putting it. And this is also a guy that we obviously had to expect. It would take some time for him to get his footing in the league, but it's good to hear that those flashes are on tape, and I'm very excited to watch him this upcoming season.
Yeah, and I wouldn't count him out even if he had a bad season next year. Like you said, he's played linebacker for not as long as you'd hope. He bounced around in college, and now he's kind of found himself a home in Atlanta, and hopefully they can get it figured out there.
Yeah, and I also think, with the improved defensive roster, that helps out obviously every single level of the field. So having those guys in front of him will make his job easier. But I love their draft class last year, and let's hope Terry Thon can do another great job on that end.
I just want to bring up one player really quickly, another player like Nolan Smith. I bang the table for Atlanta and pick at pick 44. Like if they were to take Nolan Smith there, I would have no problem, and I'd actually love if they took a guy like Keon White at pick 44, because even though they're two edge players, they're two totally different edge players.
Oh yeah.
So that's all. I mean, I don't really have to dive into that.
I like that fit a lot, getting two guys playing college ball in Georgia. So I love that. But it'll be interesting to see where they go, and I'm rooting for your team in the upcoming draft.
Again, this is Thon Ray. You guys can follow us at Falcons_drip on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Please make sure you subscribe, follow, whatever you need to do to get the alert for our next episode. If you guys enjoyed today, please leave us a review. It always helps us grow. Until then, see you next time. Rise up.